In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create trailer text as inspired by the Avengers movies using BCC and Adobe After Effects. Hi, here I am in After Effects, and this is the finished product we're going for today. Some trailer text clearly inspired by the Avengers in this video, which I'm making for educational purposes, so I hope that makes us safe there. Anyway, so I'm going to show you how to create the texture on the text, the cool lens flare, even the dust blowing by the lens flare. Alright, so let's start in a new comp and create a new solid. So of course this whole thing begins with 3D text. So BCC extruded text is what I'm using. Just going to type Avengers and apply it. I'm going to make the text a little bigger. Good. Much better. And we have to do a couple of things here. So let's change the style of the 3D text. So let's go into extrusion and change the bevel style from straight to saved preset. We have a lot of different presets that give you a lot of different bevel styles. A lot of them are really cool. One I think matches the trailer logo is this raised trim. It gives you a nice kind of rounded bevel. And now we see that the letters are overlapping in an undesirable way. So let's go back into edit text and increase the tracking to space them out a bit. There, very good. Just enough to give each letter its own space. And before we get too much further, I'm going to trace these letters. So turn the extrusion down to 0.1. Go to Layer, Auto Trace. Okay, so I'm set to Alpha. Everything's pretty low tolerance. And I'm going to create a new layer with this information. Alright, so we're going to use all these masks based on the letters later, but I wanted to create them now so we don't have to worry about it later. Alright, so let's increase the extrusion back up. Let's say 2. Looks good. And now let's create some textures for the text. So what I'm going to do is actually make a new track for my texture. And I'm going to use the BCC Grunge filter to do this. It's a cool filter, comes with a lot of great stock images that you can use as texture and maps of various sorts. So I'm just going to use the default texture here. It looks very good. You turn on color, change the color to red for this project. Maybe increase the contrast right there. And that's it. So I'm going to pre-compose this texture track now. It's going to be called texture comp. I'm moving it to the bottom and hiding it, but I am going to reference it in my material group here. So as we set up the materials, first change your material count to 2, and then go into the front back material settings, front texture layer, select the pre-comp, and there it is. Looks really nice. You can shift it around if you want to use a different part of it. It looks pretty good as it was. It's nice. I'm also going to use this same file as the bump map, give it more of a 3D look. And we're even going to add a little bit of a reflection. High contrast gray I think works well. We're not going to have a very strong reflection, just enough to give it a bit of a light. Increase the scale. Okay, now let's set up the bevel texture. This is very easy. We're just going to use that same reflection file, high contrast gray, and increase the reflectivity all the way up and the scale all the way up. Yeah, there it is. Okay, and that's pretty much all I have to do on the 3D text itself. One more thing, let's create an AE camera, 35mm, and tell the text to use the comp camera. Okay, great. Now let's do some fun stuff on top of the text. First, let's give the text more shading by applying an RGB edges effect. This is kind of a 2D cheat, but it works really well. I'm going to emphasize shadow, and I'm going to change the apply mode to multiply. Okay, so it's creating a very strong effect here. So let's turn down the pre-blur a lot, almost to nothing, like 0.4, looks good. And even the post-blur, let's turn down that a bit too. We can change the angle if we are so inclined, so to speak. And that looks good. And then let's increase the mix with original so it's not quite so overpowering. Even to like 50 maybe. But there, so that gives a nice touch to the style. It makes the bevel look a little bit more like it's separated from the face, which is what we wanted. Okay, now let's go to this track that we auto traced earlier. So what we're going to do is use an AE stroke effect on this track. In case you haven't seen the trailer, what I'm going for here is a sort of draw on effect to outline the letters. It's going to look great. So let's tell it to use all masks, and we're going to change the color to red. And we're going to animate the opacity and the N%. So just start the N% at 0 and go about, I would say, 4 seconds into your timeline, and then bring the N% to about 60 and the opacity to 0. So if I zoom in here, you can see the track there. We're also going to change the paint style to on transparent, so it shows up a lot better. Now you can see it around the V and the A. And it's still kind of hard to see with the text already there. So now we're going to animate the opacity of the text track. So set it to 0 to start, and about over 2.5 seconds, almost 3 seconds, you can have it fade up to 100. But what that gives us is a really cool drawing on effect while the text is coming on. One other thing we need to do is turn off stroke sequentially. That way we get more of the letters drawing on at once. Very cool effect. Whoever thought it up in the trailer was doing a good job. Alright, so that is almost everything to do with the text period. And now let's create a lens flare effect for this. So I'm going to create a new track, just keep it a black solid, and lens flare 3D, one of my favorite filters in the whole package. Okay, so here's the lens flare 3D. Now there's a lot of settings here, and to make our lives easier, let's just go ahead and load the preset called disable all groups. That way we only have to worry about turning on features, not taking away so many things. So we're going to turn on raise and stripe. That's all we need. Going to reposition it towards the A. We're going to turn on use comp camera. That way it's going to automatically follow the camera like everything else in our scene. And let's make some changes to how the rays look so it looks more like the trailer. Okay, so first we're going to change the color to red, kind of a deep red. Turn mix with flare color down to 0. And let's increase the scale to 0.3. The intensity will bring down to 30. And the width will bring up to 0.3. We're going to change the type to spreading. There you go. We're also going to turn on the sub beam, set that count to 2, and the count above that one, change that to like 90. Okay, looks good. Maybe even increase the scale a little bit more, just a bit. There. Alright, now let's go into the stripe. We have a few things to change here. First of all, let's bring it up just a tiny bit. Let's increase the softness. Of course, we're going to change the color to red. And we can even increase the intensity a bit, maybe just to like 18. Okay, it looks good. Now you see that the lens flare is doing some kind of jittering or shimmering there. And it's a great effect. It's a nice touch, but it goes a little fast at the default settings. So let's go into auto shimmer, bring that speed down to 5. Alright, now that we have everything else set up, let's animate the global intensity and global scale. So let's find where it's going to be at its peak. Let's say about here. Let's bring the intensity up to 100 and the scale up to 1. And I think we can go even further. Let's go more intense. And maybe even a little bit bigger. There we go. Alright, so let's create some keyframes. Go to the very start, set everything to 0. And again, over about 4 seconds or so, bring it back down to 0. And maybe make these intense keyframes easy ease. And that should look good. And it does. I can't really see it in real time, but I've rendered it and it looks good. Alright, we're almost done. Now let's just add some dust to this whole scene. So what I'm going to do is add another solid. I'm going to call it dust. There's a lot of filters that can generate dust, like particle dust. The one I'm going to use is BCC Organic Strands. And this is a very unique filter, very fun squiggly lines. If you go into the effects browser, you can see some of the different looks you can create with it. And what I'm going to do is just find a preset that looks kind of like dust, and this one does already, hot steam strands. So I'm going to apply that preset, and unfortunately they're all moving in the wrong direction. So let's go into strands and change that direction to right. Let's also use the comp camera, and let's reposition these strands off to the side. Increase the size of the source so they cover the letters well. Let's increase the length of the strands so they go across the whole screen, and the thickness so it looks a little bit more like, ambers. Okay, let's turn down the density. We've got too many there. Even down to like 1 is good. Now let's increase the thickness variance and turn down the master thickness again. And let's change the color to make them a little bit brighter. Looks good. Now in the particles group, turn down the opacity so you barely notice them at all. And that'll be the trick. Just like so. Now if you wanted to get really fancy with these, you can turn on motion blur and depth of field, which is a little more than I need to do here. Our camera doesn't have too many objects in it, but I will turn on a rough motion blur. And if you want to change the motion of the little dust particles, go into the organic noise group, and here you've got all sorts of controls over the noise amount, and frequency, and direction, and all that. So I'm just going to increase the auto evolve speed a bit so they move a little more, but that's about it. Okay, and that's it. Now let's just create a quick camera move. So keyframe at the start and end of our timeline. I'm going to do a quick push-in effect on the whole scene. And that is it. Now there's one thing I didn't do in the tutorial, which is just the other text under the Avengers. This age of sequels little comment I'm putting in on the state of modern movies. But creating that is no sweat. You could even just duplicate the text you had earlier. Of course, we don't need RGB edges on that. And, change your text here, the age of sequels. Shrink it down and reposition it under your other text. And, for material's sake, I'm probably just going to use something a lot simpler. There's a nice extrusion style preset, metal chrome. Works good for this. And repositioning it to the position under there and scaling it way down like so, and there it is. Alright, so Avengers trailer text in just a few minutes using BCC filters and one AE filter in After Effects. So if you liked what you saw here and want to learn more, you can find more information about Boris products and more tutorials at our website, and that's boriseffects.com.